Paris, 1700. Imagine the impact: a bucket of human excrement thrown from the window of a townhouse, splattering across the narrow street. The contents, a nauseating mixture of feces, urine, food scraps, and often menstrual blood, hits an unsuspecting passerby. The victim, now covered in filth, screams in outrage, but their protests are drowned out by the constant chorus of other sufferings. This was everyday life. The scene repeats hundreds of times a day, on every street, in every alley, turning the city into an open sewer. The smell, a pungent combination of ammonia, decaying fecal matter, and rotting flesh, permeates everything, from the finest clothing to the simplest bread. Human skin, constantly exposed to this assault, reacts with boils, rashes, and infections. The infant mortality rate reaches absurd peaks. For every 10 children born, 6 do not reach their 5th birthday. Dysentery, caused by the contaminated water of the Seine, claims lives en masse. Smallpox, with its grotesque pustules, disfigures and kills indiscriminately. Typhoid fever, transmitted by the lice that infest clothing and hair, completes the macabre picture. The streets, originally designed for pedestrian and cart traffic, have become impassable bottlenecks, clogged with mud, garbage, and animal carcasses. Dead horses, abandoned where they fall, swell in the sun, exuding an unbearable odor that attracts swarms of flies and legions of rats. The rats, true vectors of disease, proliferate in every corner, feeding from food scraps to decaying bodies. The population density, concentrated in overcrowded and poorly ventilated wooden buildings, facilitates the spread of disease. The lack of basic sanitation, combined with ignorance about the origin and transmission of diseases, turns Paris into a breeding ground for pestilence. The average life expectancy for those who survive childhood rarely exceeds 35 years. Death lurks around every corner, with every breath, with every sip of water. The infrastructure of Paris in 1700 is a grotesque anachronism, a medieval relic incapable of handling the population explosion. The streets, narrow and winding, follow the original layout of the Roman city without any modern urban planning. Most are paved with irregular stones which sink into the mud during rains, creating fetid and slippery puddles. The absence of an efficient sewage system turns the streets into veritable rivers of filth. Human waste, dumped directly from the windows, mixes with rainwater, food scraps, and animal excrement, forming a viscous and foul-smelling mud that covers everything. The Seine, the main source of drinking water for the city, also serves as a garbage and sewage dump. The banks of the river are lined with tanneries, slaughterhouses, and dye works, which dump their toxic waste directly into the water. The water of the Seine, therefore, is a poisonous soup, contaminated by bacteria, parasites, and chemicals. The population, however, continues to drink it, ignoring the risks. Wells, when they exist, are often contaminated by sewage infiltration. The lack of public restrooms further aggravates the problem. People urinate and defecate anywhere, in the streets, in the alleys, in the corners of buildings. Personal hygiene is practically non-existent. Most people rarely bathe, at most once or twice a year. Clothes, rarely washed, become a paradise for lice and fleas. The houses, built mainly of wood and clay, are overcrowded and poorly ventilated. The lack of natural light and constant humidity favor the growth of mold and mildew. Inadequate ventilation prevents the dispersion of odors and toxic gases. The heating system, based on wood-burning fireplaces, produces smoke and soot which pollute the air and irritate the lungs. The combination of all these factors creates an unhealthy environment conducive to the spread of disease. The poorest neighborhoods of Paris, such as the Marais and the Faubourg Saint-Antoine, are true labyrinths of misery and degradation. Narrow and winding streets, dilapidated buildings, extreme overpopulation. In each room, entire families huddle together, sharing the space with domestic animals such as chickens, pigs, and goats. Promiscuity is unavoidable. The lack of privacy and the absence of hygiene favor the spread of venereal diseases. Prostitution is widespread, especially among young women who desperately seek a way to survive. Children from an early age are forced to work in the streets, begging, stealing, or selling small objects. Many die of hunger, cold, or disease. Hospitals, such as the Hôtel Dieu, are more like warehouses for the sick than healing institutions. Overcrowding is extreme. Patients are piled up in beds, often 2 or 3 per bed. The lack of hygiene and the absence of adequate medical care turn hospitals into true hotbeds of infection. The mortality rate is very high. Cemeteries, such as the Cimetière des Innocents, are overcrowded. Bodies are buried in mass graves without any ceremony. The odor of decomposition permeates the air, making life unbearable for nearby residents. The authorities, powerless or indifferent, take no action to solve the problem. Corruption is widespread. The nobles and the bourgeois, protected by their wealth and power, live in luxurious palaces, ignoring the misery that surrounds them. The distance between rich and poor is abysmal. Social inequality is glaring. Violence is endemic. Assaults, murders, and fights are common in the streets. The police, poorly paid and poorly equipped, are unable to maintain order. Justice is slow and inefficient. Impunity is the rule. Life, for most Parisians, is a constant struggle for survival. Smallpox, caused by the variola major virus, is a highly contagious disease characterized by high fever, skin rashes, and pustules that disfigure the face and body. The mortality rate is high, especially among children. Dysentery, caused by bacteria or parasites, is an intestinal disease that causes diarrhea, abdominal cramps, and dehydration. The lack of basic sanitation and contaminated water favor the spread of the disease. Typhus, caused by the bacterium Rickettsia prowazekii, is transmitted by lice. The disease causes high fever, headache, skin rashes, and delirium. Typhoid fever, caused by the bacterium Salmonella typhi, is transmitted by contaminated water and food. The disease causes high fever, headache, abdominal pain, and skin rashes. Bubonic plague, caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, is transmitted by rat fleas. The disease causes high fever, swelling of the lymph nodes, buboes, and internal bleeding. The mortality rate is very high. The bubonic plague epidemics, which plagued Paris throughout the centuries, decimated the population. The lack of knowledge about the origin and transmission of diseases makes it difficult to combat epidemics. Doctors, with their rudimentary methods and their ignorance about microbiology, are powerless to contain the spread of diseases. Bloodletting, purgatives, and plasters are the most common treatments, but they are rarely effective. Quarantine, when applied, is inefficient. People, desperate, resort to amulets, prayers, and religious rituals to protect themselves from diseases. Death, omnipresent, is accepted as an inevitable fact of life. The Seine River, which cuts through Paris, is the main source of drinking water for the city, but it also serves as a garbage and sewage dump. The banks of the river are lined with tanneries, slaughterhouses, and dye works, which dump their toxic waste directly into the water. The tanneries use urine, pigeon droppings, and tannin to tan the leather, releasing ammonia, hydrogen sulfide, and other chemicals into the water. The slaughterhouses dump blood, viscera, and other animal remains into the river, contaminating the water with bacteria and parasites. The dye works use heavy metals such as lead, mercury, and arsenic to dye the fabrics, releasing these toxic metals into the water. In addition, the Seine receives domestic sewage, human waste, and food scraps, turning into a poisonous soup. The water of the Seine, therefore, is unfit for human consumption. However, the population continues to drink it, ignoring the risks. The lack of alternatives and the ignorance about the origin and transmission of diseases contribute to this situation. The water sellers who roam the streets of the city sell water from the Seine, often filtered with dirty cloths. The quality of the water is dubious. Wells, when they exist, are often contaminated by sewage infiltration. The water from the wells, therefore, is also unfit for human consumption. The population, desperate, resorts to alcoholic beverages such as wine and beer to quench their thirst. Alcohol, however, does not solve the problem of water contamination. The water of the Seine continues to be the main source of disease and death in Paris.
The grave diggers, the coffin makers, and the candle sellers thrive amidst misery and death. The high mortality rate guarantees a constant flow of customers. The grave diggers, overworked, bury the bodies in mass graves without any ceremony. The haste and the lack of respect for the dead are shocking.